Hey guys, welcome back to my small engine repair channel. Today's project is the first video in our series of how to service a two-stage snowblower. And first thing we're going to tackle today is to clean the carburetor. Alright guys, so getting at the carburetor is going to be different for each and every machine. On this particular John Deere, a couple things you're going to have to do. Take out the key, okay, and then there's a couple of wing nuts here on the top, plastic wing nuts. We're going to take off. Okay. And then the next thing, there are two 10mm nuts. Alright, so then the thing should pretty much slide off with the exception of this choke. Now, on this one, sometimes you can pull them off by hand, but a lot of other times you got to get underneath there with a screwdriver. And you want to get under there and then gently pry up on this choke knob. Alright, so then now this whole thing kind of slides out and up, and then it's going to be still attached by a couple of different things. This one's in two different pieces. Okay. It's going to be attached by the wiring for the key switch, and then attached by the pump or the primer line on the back side here. So, getting back here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the primer line from the carburetor, and that just snapped. It's nice and brittle. Okay, and then I'm going to remove the switch up, the wiring harness for the key switch up here, and that I'm going to need two hands for. Alright, so next thing is just remove these couple of spacers and this filter. Alright, and we have access to our carburetor here now. So next thing we're going to do is disconnect the fuel line. So I'm going to, in this case, shut off the fuel. And if yours doesn't have a fuel shut off, maybe use something like these, like a set of fuel line clamped, or even a pair of vice grips. Needle nose vice grips would do the trick. Then I just try and keep something to catch some of the fuel, even a rag. I actually left the wiring attached there just because of the brittleness of that hose. I don't want to mess around with that wiring and break that off at all. Just get it up and out of our way. Get the hose clamp off, and then a lot of times these fuel lines are kind of crusted on there, so I just kind of wiggle it back and forth a little bit, and then it usually comes off. Alright, now this carburetor in this particular case has got a couple of studs, okay, that we're going to have to loosen off, because in some cases these carburetors just slide on these studs here. This particular one we actually have to physically remove these particular studs. So I'm going to get the socket for that and remove those. Okay, so I got a 4mm socket. Just start loosening these off. Okay, and then as you can see, it's got a flange on these bolts, or these on these studs. Okay, so that wasn't obviously going to come off without taking these off. Okay, now the next thing is just to take a picture of the linkage and how it goes on. Now in this case the linkage is pretty simple. Yours could be a little bit more complex with multiple holes. This one just has two holes, one smaller hole for a return spring or tension spring, and then one for the throttle linkage. Okay, so just kind of make a mental note or take a picture, or do what I'm doing and videotape yourself. Okay. So now that these studs are out, and they're both the same size, so you don't have to worry about that. Now I'm going to gingerly try and get this off, and the reason being is that you can kind of see in between that brown insulator and the carburetor there is a gasket. Okay, so I don't want to tear that and have to replace it. So hopefully I'm going to gingerly try and remove this without tearing this gasket. But it looks like half of the gasket is stuck to the insulator and half to the carburetor. Okay, there we go. Good. So next thing we need to do is to remove that return spring or that tension spring. And I'm just using a pair of long needle nose pliers. Okay. And then to get the carburetor off, it's just on this particular one, sometimes it's a Z bend for that linkage. This one is just a U-shaped bend. And you could get some fuel spilling out as you turn this carburetor over. Okay, which I am. Alright, there we go. One carburetor off, so we're going to go ahead and take this over to the workbench, and I'll show you how to dive into this and make sure it's all nice and clean. Alright guys, so while I'm going to be cleaning the carburetors, now's a good time to open up your fuel and actually drain all the fuel out of your tank. So just get yourself something to catch the fuel, and then a good trick would be to kind of open up the fuel tank, allow a little bit of venting, and that should get the fuel coming out at a fairly good pace. Alright guys, so this particular carburetor is made by Nicky, which is a pretty popular brand of carburetor. Your carburetor might be slightly different than this one, but the principles are all the same for cleaning these carburetors. This one in particular, I have to take off these two screws on the bottom here, two Phillips screws, to get the float bowl off, and that's where I'm going to start. Now, if yours was really dirty on the outside, what I would recommend is maybe take a paintbrush and some old gas that came out of your tank there, and just kind of like wipe this off. This one's not too bad. Snowblowers don't tend to get as dirty because they operate in a much cleaner environment. That's why a lot of times you don't even see air filters on snowblowers. Sorry, this one was on there pretty tight. Alright, so if you look in the bottom of this float bowl, you can see a little bit of sediment, and the fuel is probably 6 months old, probably from the last year, just by the color of it. So yeah, there's a bunch of sediment, and it's actually discolored. You can see the discoloration, so we're going to clean all that out, of course. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is just take this float off. This whole float assembly comes right off on this particular one, and you could actually dislodge further take it apart and take the float off. And then I always usually check to make sure there's no gas in the float itself, otherwise you could replace that. And then here is a needle valve which has a rubber tip on the end. So what I'm checking for is any deformation in the rubber tip. That would indicate that this would have to be replaced. That one seems good, and the seat is just plastic, so there's not much to check there. Alright, so the next thing guys is on this particular piece, there's a port in here that you can take out. I just kind of stick this coat hanger and just push that port out, and what you're looking for is this to be nice and clean. Okay, this jet. and you can see mine is actually pretty clean. So that I'm not going to worry about too much, but if it was clogged up, I would just get one of these little torch tip cleaner sets here. And just find yourself the proper sized one to fit through there. And just make sure that's nice and cleaned out. Okay, so on the base of the carburetor here is an emulsion tube, and in that emulsion tube there's a whole bunch of holes. Again, you're going to want to get in there, make sure that these holes are actually nice and clear. So that's good. Mine seems to be in good shape there. There we go. Okay, so as I said, next thing you want to do is make sure on this emulsion tube that all of these holes, it's going to be hard to pick up on the camera, there's holes in this tube. There's 3 right there. Okay, you want to make sure those are nice and clear, but there's also that emulsion tube goes straight up and into the throat of the carburetor, and it also has 3 holes in there, which are a little bit harder to access. So, sorry about the dogs. So what I do is just take a bread tie and stick them in through these holes. Okay, in both directions. Okay, and then the ones inside, do the same thing. I just stick that bread tie in through the hole, each hole, and just make sure that all those holes are nice and cleaned out. Okay, so that's pretty much it for disassembly on this guy. Okay, what I've done is also taken this O-ring off as well, and the reason for that is now I'm going to actually spray some carb cleaner in all of these little holes and passageways. Okay, just to make sure everything's clear, including the emulsion tube and the little main jet there. Alright, so guys, just make sure you're wearing your safety glasses when you're doing this, because this stuff kind of sprays all over the place. Okay, main jet here. Make sure that's nice and clear up. All these holes. But look at the yellow color that's coming out. Carb spray is just clear color, so if it's coming out yellow like that, you know you're getting some gunk out of there. Okay, so now once you've done that, I'm obviously going to do this bowl as well, but I like to just spray it out with some compressed air. All the little passageways are done. For this bowl, I like to spray a little bit of carb cleaner in there. And then I'll take a little piece of steel wool. Now I'm going to do this off camera because I don't want to do this in and around all my clean stuff. I don't want any of these little pieces of shards coming off of here and getting clogged in anything. So now that's all there is to kind of clean in all the parts. Now it's back to the reassembly. So first thing I'm going to do is take this little main jet, kind of put it back into this tube. Okay. And then try and fits in a specific way, so you gotta make sure you put it back in the right way. Okay, so that's that. Okay, then we can put our needle back on our float, just like so. Stick it on there, put my float pin in. So then you stick this this guy back on. It fits a certain way, and it's pretty self-explanatory which way it fits. Alright, so then just take this, it goes on a very specific way as well. So I like to try and kind of go this way with it, just so that that gasket stays put where it's supposed to be, because this can be tricky, a little bit tricky to get right. Okay, that looks good. So then you just put the bowl back on. Some bowls are very specific in which direction you put them on. Tecumseh, for instance, lawnmower carburetors. Very careful you put it on the right way. This one in particular, not as bad to try and figure out which way it goes. Just tighten those guys up. And that's it. It's ready to go back on the machine. Alright. Hook up the linkage here. Sometimes these, there you go. Sometimes these designs are not designed for maintenance. And just get your little spring back. Okay, that's good. Alright, so next thing, studs. Alright, and there you have it, guys. It's all back together now. We're just going to put some fresh fuel in the tank, and we're going to go ahead and fire this one up, test drive it. Hopefully this one was informative. About 90% of the problems or issues I have with small engines are dealing with fuel related stuff, leaving fuel sit for too long. With the ethanol and the fuel today, that just gums up all the passageways in the carburetor, and you know, it just loses its ability to burn properly actually over time. So anyways guys, this is just part one of our video series on how to service this thing. Hope you've enjoyed it, and until the next part, take care.